Good evening and welcome. I'm Craig Snyder, the president of the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia. I'm going to start, as I always do, with our obligatory announcements, asking you to silence your cell phones if you haven't already. That having been said, we always encourage you to engage with us on our social media platforms, so please feel free to tweet during today's event using our Twitter handle @WACPhila. And of course, please, if you haven't already done so, like the World Affairs Council on Facebook. We've already had a series of, I think, really great events this spring. Sometimes I worry that we may be putting you through something of an endurance test with the number of programs we've been having. But we've had great opportunities to present important speakers, and we want to take advantage of those opportunities. Tonight, sure to be another. But there's still more to look forward to, so a couple of commercial announcements. Next week, we have an event that could not be timelier, considering the deadly impact of homegrown terrorists, the pendency of the proposed nuclear framework with Iran, the ongoing war with ISIS. We'll be presenting former Deputy CIA Director Mike Morrell on the evening of Wednesday the 13th. If you haven't already registered, I really encourage you to do so. Mr. Morrell was acting director of the CIA when the towers fell on 9/11, 2001. He also helped coordinate and execute the mission that ended up in the death of Osama bin Laden. He was actually the only person to be physically with President Bush on 9/11 and President Obama on the day that bin Laden was killed. So he obviously has interesting stories and observations to be able to share, and that's on the 13th. Then, for those of you who've been following the news of the normalization of U.S.-Cuban relations, we're going to host an appearance of high-level Cuban diplomats here on Monday, the 18th of May. Deputy Chief of Mission Juan Limiguero and First Secretary Ms. Yanette Stable will be coming to Philadelphia, and it is truly a historic visit. It's the first time that senior-level Cuban diplomats have been given permission by the Department of State to speak to an American audience outside of New York or Washington in about half a century. Then the very next day, May 19th, we're hosting an event titled Nuclear Nightmares, Securing the World Before It's Too Late. Obviously a subject of great importance. And then finally, for this part of our season, before we take a break for the summer, we're holding a program on June 2nd called The Rational Middle, discussing energy policy with a panel of really a very distinct number of different points of view on the important question of America's energy future. So there's lots still to look forward to, and we hope that you'll be joining us for these programs. Events like this one and those that I've told you about, along with your support as members and corporate partners, enable the Council to offer its most important programs, those to the diverse group of over 2,100 middle and high school students in 80 schools throughout the tri-state area, fostering skills and sensibilities that they need in order to be able to thrive and compete in the knowledge-based global community in which they will live their lives. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker and moderator for this evening. Ms. Dana Perino, former White House press secretary, was the spokesperson for the White House from 2007 to 2009 under President George W. Bush. Only the second woman press secretary in U.S. history and the first female Republican to hold the post, and one of the most widely respected members of President Bush's senior staff. Dana Perino became a keen analyst of the latest political news and an expert in crafting and communicating messages under stressful conditions, to say the least, in the White House. Tonight, she joins us to share her insights, her advice for success, and personal stories from her new memoir, And the Good News Is, in which she reflects on her experiences with the often contentious White House press corps and gives readers a peek behind the scenes of the Fox News The Five, which I know we have many fans of that show in the audience tonight. Dana is joined on stage this evening by one of Philadelphia's own journalists, Mike Jarek, the co-anchor of Fox 29 News. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike. Please.
Great, thank you very much. Welcome, Dana.
Thank you.
Welcome to my town.
I have had such a positive experience in Philadelphia.
Yeah?
I've been here one day. The last time I was here, I was with my husband, and it was about -30 with the wind chill.
That sounds right.
And I came here today, and it was such a beautiful day. And I started off with you and Alex this morning, which I appreciated.
She was on the show early this morning.
That's right.
It was great.
It was, I mean, it was the best guest you've ever had.
Really, truly. We had Justin Bieber on last week, so.
And still, I was the best guest you ever had.
You know, that very thing, let's just go right to that, because in the book you say that humor is a trump card in your life. What do you mean?
Well, on the 5, and also at the White House, but mostly on the 5, we talk about very serious issues, but we don't take ourselves that seriously.
Hold on, your ride's here. But it looks like you're having fun.
We do have fun. And do you know that the 5 is the longest job I've ever held? Because every couple of years, I would either get promoted or I would move on to something else. Yeah. And the 5 was supposed to be a 6-week-long temporary show.
A test.
A test. And I think Roger Ailes, from what I gather from him and the lore of the 5, was that he had always wanted to try an ensemble cast, and he wanted us to resemble a family at dinner, discussing the news of the day, which is what I grew up doing with my dad. And so I got there. It was temporary. I had my own business. I was doing lots of other things, and I didn't even know any of the people. And I sit down, and I meet Greg Gutfeld.
The guy to your left.
Guy to my left, and he is one of the funniest people. You're right, he makes you laugh. He and I think so much alike that I'm already laughing before he finishes a sentence, because I can see where he's going. And in the book, I call him the brother I never wanted.
So who's Bob then? Is he the uncle?
He's the uncle I miss very much. He's had some back surgery and some problems, and we're hoping he's back soon.
Yeah, I know. He's been gone.
And everybody that asked about him, just rest assured, I will let him know that you asked about him. It does help.
Yeah, he likes that a lot, doesn't he? But before we get into real serious topics here, the most serious topic, I think, on the agenda tonight is, how's your dog?
Jasper. I have a breaking news alert.
Oh, no.
Jasper and I are going to be on Fox and Friends tomorrow morning at 8:50, Cooking with Friends. Have you seen this segment?
Yes.
Apparently, we're being paired up with a celebrity chef who makes dog biscuits. And so...
That's just hours from now, you know, Dana.
Believe me, I know. But you'll be up, and I figure I'll be up.
4:30. Yep, watching you.
4:30?
I get up at 4:30. What
wow,
time do you
that's
get up?
easy.
4:30 in the morning.
No, I know, but I used to get up every day when I worked at the White House. I got up at 4.
Ooh.
So that because, you know, the President of the United States, George W. Bush, he ran an early White House.
He did.
And so if he was in the Oval Office at 6, you know, you had to be there and prepared.
Did you live close by?
I lived on Capitol Hill, and at that time of day, there's no traffic.
Yeah.
Right? So I could have done the traffic report, like, we just zoomed right in.
So what's the first thing you do when you go into the White House?
Say a prayer of thanks.
Yes.
Really,
Gratitude.
it was. And I write about that in the book a little bit, because when I got the job as the deputy press secretary, that's when you get a commission. And I had been in the administration before in different places, the Justice Department and White House Council on Environmental Quality. But on the day that you get your commission, you have a private meeting with the chief of staff. And at that time, it was Andy Card. And he's such a great guy. He's like, should be like America's grandfather. And he sits you down, and he explains, like, this is a big deal. Okay, and here's some responsibilities, and your responsibility is not to the President of the United States or to me, it is to the people of the United States. And it's a little bit of a lesson of, like, if you see something that is wrong, you have an obligation to say something. And he also said, when you come to the White House, you can get a big head. You can get White House-itis, he called it. And the best way to not get a big head about working in the White House is to share the experience. He said, so when people call and ask you for a tour of the West Wing, don't roll your eyes. Like, figure out a way to share the experience with people and bring people in and invite friends to come to the White House mess and things like that. But the last thing he left me with is, he recommended that every day before I walked into the West Wing and before the Marines opened the door for me, that I just say a little prayer of thanks for the opportunity to serve the United States of America. And it was great advice, and so that's how I started my day every day.
Mm-hmm. You need, yeah. A good lesson for all of us. By the way, did you all get the book? You have the book? Because it's not just about politics and your experience at the White House at all. It's a great primer for all of us, but especially young people coming up. Maybe if you have somebody in your 20s and 30s who needs advice, and maybe even daily advice like you're talking about. Do you mind telling the story? Do you still have the little Zen thing on your pillow?
Yeah, it's in my...
Now, I don't know that personally. I mean, she tells it in the book. There's this little Zen note on her pillow.
I conclude the book with 2 phrases that I coined, and it took me a long time to get to this point in my life, but it was something that I'd been searching for so long, and I coined 2 phrases that I have figured out a way to have productive serenity and to be joyously content. And I talk a lot about finding a work-life balance, the career transition I've had, the fact that I made a lot of plans because I like to plan and have everything, just so. And every time I do, God had a better idea, and that's how all these other things happened. And as I was commuting back and forth from Washington to New York, participating on the 5, but really it wasn't a permanent show yet. And I was full of angst because I had a business, and I was on the Broadcasting Board of Governors for President Obama and for the Voice of America. Mm-hmm. I was traveling to Africa for my charity. I had paid speaking opportunities. And still, I was working more hours than I did at the White House. And I got back, I can't remember which hotel it was, but you ever seen these Zen cards that they put on your pillow?
Oh,
they used to be chocolate. Now then there's no more chocolate, but it was a little Zen card, and it said, I can't remember the exact one. Basically, it was about be a person of few words, and if you are going to speak kindly, mm-hmm. and to be humble, that is the best way. And I thought, that's what I was looking. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I was searching for. And just as I'd gone to Africa for a trip on behalf of Voice of America, I went with my 2 Democratic colleagues, and we thought what we wanted to do is try to expand America's broadcasting capabilities in Africa beyond the traditional audience, which was mostly men, because we wanted to do more outreach to women for maternal health and global child development, because we found that if the women are seeking that kind of information. So if we could provide more of that content, they would be more likely to listen to us than they would be to listen to like an Al Jazeera. I write this big life plan on the plane on the way home from Nigeria, and it was detailed and perfect. I knew exactly what I was going to do every week, blah, blah, blah. And I'm at baggage claim, and I get a phone call from Fox News asking if I'd be willing to come up for the summer and do this temporary show called The 5.
Wow.
And my first reaction, of course, was, well, I don't live in New York. And I called my husband, and he said, congratulations. He said, this is what you always wanted to do, was be on a political roundtable, which I tell George Will, because in early parts of the book, I write about my upbringing, and one of the things that used to drive my sister crazy is on Saturdays we would have this family meeting about which church service we were going to go to on Sunday, and I would always advocate to go to the early service at 8:30, and that drove her crazy. But I knew that if we went to the 8:30 service and Sunday school, we'd get home in time to watch Meet the Press and This Week with ABC.
Wow. That is great.
So then when George Will left ABC to come to Fox, I sent a letter, handwritten. Mm-hmm. And I said what an honor it was now that since I was a kid, I wanted to be on a political panel with George Will. I never thought it would be insulting. But I don't think he thought he wasn't that complimented.
Well, now he's working for us, right?
Yeah, that's what I meant. So when he came on and I got to be on a show with George Will, I was like, wow, I've really made it.
You've made it. Was the line, if you have something to say, make sure you make a point? Or if you're going to speak, make a point.
Yeah, and to be kind.
And to be kind. You talk about kindness a lot in that book.
I know.
Yeah.
It's really unusual. It was funny, I was at an event in California last Sunday, and it was at a synagogue, and the rabbi, boy, he needed some Prozac. This guy was so negative, and every question had to be with, you write a positive book. And one of his questions was that he'd gone to Barnes & Noble to buy the book, which I appreciated very much, and he said, on the new nonfiction table, there were 26 new books. And that mine was the only one with a positive message.
Wow.
And he said, so are you out of kilter with the rest of America? And I said, well, my book's #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. I think I hit it just right.
Yeah, that's for sure.
It's like it was a different way of looking at it. When I first was approached about writing a book a few years ago, I was asked what kind of book, did you ever want to write a book? And I had actually written on a piece of paper, because I did everybody else's book tours. I did Karl Rove's, Laura Bush, George W. Bush, and Charles Krauthammer. I even helped Greg Gutfeld with his book. And I had written on a piece of paper one time on the train on the Acela, if I were to write a book, what would it look like? Because I'd been doing a lot of mentoring events, and I realized that I kept giving the same advice, and I kept getting the same questions. So I wrote it down, and with like little things about swallow your sarcasm, don't wear Ugg boots at the office, don't chew gum in front of the President of the United States, turn off yourself. Little things like that were practical advice, and like a bigger message of speaking persuasively and civilly, and with being gracious and finding your inner dignity to be able to make a point. And they told me it would never sell. Because what they wanted was a big political book with some gossip, and I said, well, I don't have any gossip.
You don't?
And also they would, well, just about you.
Whoa!
I'm saving that till the end. So then a guy that worked for that publisher went to another publisher, and he said, I'd like to try your book here, and gave it a real shot. So I'm grateful for it, because it does answer those questions of how did you become a White House press secretary.
Yeah.
But it also does something else that nobody else has done yet, and that is to provide the personal point of view about who George W. Bush was as not just my boss and the commander-in-chief and the president of the United States, but he really became like a second father to me.
Yeah.
So I take people behind the scenes and describe instances and events where there were no cameras around, and only I could tell those stories. And I felt like the timing was right for this book.
For the people that, a lot of people gave him trouble during those years and still do.
Yes.
How do you deal with that? What don't we know about him? Where do his detractors get it wrong?
Well, in lots of ways. I mean, one of them was that they always thought that George Bush was dumb.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that Dick Cheney was his brain.
Mm-hmm.
Or Karl was his
Rove.
brain, right? There's a funny story in the book about Karl Rove. So I get to the White House. I've been there for a week. I was at the White House Council on Environmental Quality. And my mom's not very political, but she knew that working at the White House was a really big deal, and big deal for me. So she calls me on the Friday night, and I'm still at the office, and she wanted to know how my week was. And I said, Mom, it was amazing. I got to go, I watched Marine One land, and I think the president waved at me. And I got to go to a meeting about the Healthy Forest Initiative, and I did this and that. And I said, and then I put this document through this staffing process, and Karl Rove actually called me. It wasn't his assistant. It was actually Karl Rove. And Karl Rove was so nice, and he helped me. The document was great, and my mom says, who the hell is Karl Rove? And I love to tell him that story. I always felt that President Bush was the most prepared person in the room at any time. He was also very strategic in his diplomatic relations. The way I describe a scene when we're in Israel, and he knows that there is one of the members of the Israeli cabinet was likely to oppose Olmert when we were close to a deal, with the boss. Close, bear with me. I mean, closer than they've been in years.
Yeah.
And Olmert's going on and on. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you so much for coming here. And finally, the president, after a while, in this small dinner that I got to attend, he says, thank you for having us. We're honored to be here, too. But I'm going to tell you something right now. If there's anybody across this table who plans to attack this man as soon as he makes a tough decision, please tell me now, because I'm the President of the United States of America, and I will not waste my country's capital on you if you aren't serious.
See that? Just
and I got goosebumps, and I got a little teary, because it was a moment of watching the President of the United States stick up for America when no one was watching. It wasn't the cameras weren't there. He didn't want me to tell this story. But I remember the next morning, I get on the plane. We were going to Kuwait, and I needed him to sign off on something I was going to tell the press. So I knocked on his area on the plane, and he said, "Come on in." I said, "Oh, I don't want to bother you." "No, no, sit down." So he'd like to have a chat. So I said, "About last night," and he said, "Pretty cool, huh?" I said, "Yeah, that was cool." And you know what else he did that night? instead of leaving it like that, like just like with the, like drop the mic.
Kaboom.
Yeah, we're glad we're here. He says, there's a little kerfuffle on the other side of the table, like, oh, no, there's no problems here, there's nobody. But we knew from the CIA, because they know things, right? Where's my friend? He's over here somewhere.
Ed.
Yeah. He says, who here was born in Israel? And only Zippy Livni raised her hand. And he said, well, I'd like to hear your stories about how you came here. How'd your family come here? And I just would be really curious. Let's start with you. And he points down the other end of the table from where I was, and it was the chief of staff. He looks at Olmert, who gives permission, and he says, well, sir, my family came from Iraq. And he starts explaining. The next one's Poland and Hungary. And pretty soon, across the table, like, wait, your dad was in Poland in 1920? Because that's when my dad was there. And were you, my mom, and you? And all of a sudden, they've made all of these small world connections. They actually work together every day, and they'd never discussed it. So all of a sudden, there's a feeling of goodwill in the room. And to top the night off, the president lets this go on for a while, and then he says, I had a feeling you all had forgotten why you were here in the first place. And we left.
Point.
And he went to have a private meeting with Olmert, and I went and huddled with the Israeli counterpart so we could tell the press something. And I asked him, I said, how did you know to get that going on that side of the room? And he said, I just had a feeling that they'd all lost sight of the goal. So when I say, like, what do people not know about him, is that he could advance something. One of the pieces of advice I give in the book is passing on credit to advance a larger goal. This example was in the Oval Office one day at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I can't even remember why I was in there. We're having a chat. And the phone rings, and his aide says, it's the CIA director for you. Okay, there's the phone. Of course, I moved to leave, and the president says, no, you can stay. I'm like, okay, so of course, I'm kind of nosy.
Speakerphone?
No speakerphone. And he said, I can only hear his end. He says, good job. All right, tell them when they're ready, I'd love to see them, and when you get back, why don't you come over, and we'll have a talk about it. So he hangs up, and I said, what was that all about? Because I knew I'm about to get the questions anyway, so I might as well just find out straight from the horse's mouth. And he said, those FARC hostages that were being held in Colombia, they've just been released, rescued. And I said, oh, so can I, when the news breaks, can I tell the press that I was here and it was 4 o'clock? And reporters like color. That's one of the ways, a secret of a press secretary. Just tell them what the president had to eat, and they're like, oh, okay, great, and they run off, and they think that they've got some sort of news. It's a little trick if you're ever a press secretary. And he says, no, I don't want any credit. Give all the credit to President Uribe. Well, here's why. At that time, we were trying to get the Colombian Free Trade Agreement passed. And one of the Democrats' chief objections was that Uribe had not been doing enough to fight terrorism. And so, the president helped him out. I mean, we helped the Colombians, but he didn't want any credit for that because he wanted Uribe to get the credit. And that's when I realized, I'm like, okay, so he could have used some good press at that time, believe me.
Yeah.
But he wasn't worried about it.
So what you're saying is he's much more skilled than people give him credit for.
Yeah, and he's very funny. That's one thing I could say that from behind the scenes. I loved watching him with Mrs. Bush and the girls because he could make them laugh just with a look. And one of the things that first attracted me to him was in 2000, he was doing an interview with Barbara Walters. And I remember watching it, and she said, Governor Bush, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be? And just like that, he said, but Barbara, I'm not a tree, I'm a bush.
Oh, yes! I didn't even think about that. That's good.
It's good, right? And so we had good, clean jokes in the White House.
Really?
A lot of wit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's clever.
He's clever, and also the other thing I write about is how he knew how to manage people very well. So I just gave you an example how he managed international relations. But the way that he managed us, like he really got to know us. A piece of advice I give in the book is always take the deputy job, because even though you have to work weekends, holidays, nights, that's when you get to know the boss. And you learn the job so that if you ever need to step in, you can. Well, on those occasions, the president would ask all about my life. And I remember going to the Boy Scout Jamboree, and In fact, earlier today I told a story, and one of the young people working the event, he said, "Oh, I was one of those Boy Scouts." And I thought, wow, the time goes by very fast. But we get back on the helicopter. It was one of my first times on Marine One, and I just wanted to sit quietly, not cause any problems. You know, I didn't know, like, I wasn't sure, do you speak on this chopper? And he says, he has a boxed dinner that the White House mess had sent with him, and he said, "You want one of these?" And it was a peanut butter and honey sandwich. And I really did want one, but I said, no, that I couldn't, no, of course not. He said,
so this was early on.
This is early on, this is
Okay.
early 2005. It's like, come on.
Come on.
And then so I had that, and he likes Sun Chips, but not the cheddar kind. And we just had this chat. He asked me all about my upbringing on a ranch, and he wanted to know about my family pets and all about meeting Peter. And he learns over time, over the next couple of years, about my family's divorce, my parents' divorce when I was 28, and it was really hard for me, even though I should have been an adult. There's really no books for adult children of divorce. There's really just not. And
next book.
Could have, yeah, my next book. And he talked me through it a lot. Well, my dad had not come to the White House in those years that I was press secretary, and it was getting towards the end, and I sort of felt like I should ask one more time, because if I don't, I'll feel guilty. And if I do and he says no, at least I'll always know. Mm-hmm. And my husband is British originally, American naturalized citizen. He loves any event, any American thing. My husband loves to go to it. So we're getting towards the end, and this is one of the last dinners. It was with Prime Minister Berlusconi. So I tell Peter, I said, I think I should invite my dad. And to my surprise, my dad says yes. And Peter gets him a plane ticket and orders a tux for him. And my dad's from Wyoming. He's never worn a tux in his life, okay? And this is the big Italian-American night at the White House. And 2 weeks before the dinner, I hadn't bothered the president about it because we're in the middle of the financial crisis and other things, and we're wrapping up the presidency. So I didn't say, oh, my dad's coming to the White House. But he gets on the chopper one day, and we were headed to Andrews. And I was already sitting there, and he comes out, and all the fans are waving at him. So he gets on board, and he's looking out the window waving, and I was sitting here. And he says, so, I see you invited your dad from the White House to the White House. He doesn't look at me. I'm like, yes, sir. I did. And he said, it's a big deal. I'm like, yeah, it's a big deal. And I remember we were just passing the Washington Monument, and he looked right at me. He said, and I am so proud of you. And he knew how important this was to me. So a couple weeks later, the event's going to happen. And my dad and I, as close as we were when I was a girl, I felt like we just didn't have that much to talk about. And we're about to walk into the White House. So we're walking in, and who's the first person we see? Scalia, Alito, Peter Pace,
wow.
Rudy Giuliani. And all of them were like, Dana, oh my gosh, it's so great to see you. And it's pretty overwhelming. And we're in the line to get our picture taken, and the military aide was about to announce us, and the president says, oh no, I know who this is. Leo Perino, we have been waiting for you for years. We are so happy you're here. And he said, do you want to meet Condi? Have you met Laura Bush? Come on. And President Bush literally takes my dad off my hands, and for the next 2.5 hours, I never saw him.
That's fantastic.
And I credit the president with really restoring my relationship with my dad.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is great.
So these are the kinds of stories that I include in the book throughout, because for me, I just felt like the history, everyone's going to comment on policy and politics for the rest of time. And no one will know what it was like to be with him visiting wounded warriors, but I was there when a wounded Marine had not opened his eyes for 2 weeks since his injury, but he opens his eyes when the president is there asking for the Purple Heart to be read to him. And I was there when the mama yelled at him about her son being in the hospital bed, wounded at Bethesda Naval. And I remember he stood there and he just took it. As if I just described it. I felt like he wanted to absorb the grief, and he felt like he needed to be there. And she railed at him, like, why is it my child in this bed and not yours? And eventually the husband says, Mr. President, thank you for coming, and we left. And that was my first time visiting wounded warriors with him, and I went to a lot more of them after that. But we get on Marine One to leave, and it's quiet. And he says, that mama sure was mad at me. I said, yes, sir. And then he looked out the window and he said, and I don't blame her a bit. And he had this one tear that was rolling down his cheek, and he didn't try to flick it away. And then we flew back to the White House. So what I've tried to do here is, I mean, there's some fun stories in here too, stories about humility, stories about Vladimir Putin, who really thought that President Bush had fired Dan Rather. This isn't my first briefing of a world leader. I was junior Birdman. I didn't know what I mean, I kind of knew what I was doing in theory, but I had never done it in practice. And 43 knows that I'm kind of nervous. That my responsibility was to go in and tell 43 and Putin what the press corps was likely to ask from the American side. And I'd been told by the chief of communications, make sure you remind Putin that our press corps always asks about press freedoms. I'm like, okay. So I knew the one question they were going to get, and then I say, of course, our press is likely to ask about press freedoms in Russia. And I tried to say it with, be brave, and I'm looking at the coldest man on the planet. And 43 looks at Vladimir Putin, he says, okay, you got that? And Putin says, why would I discuss press freedoms in Russia when you fired that newsman?
Oh, jeez.
And it just happened, and the president was like, what are you talking about? He's like, you fired the newsman. And 43 says, wait, Vladimir, are you talking about Dan Rather? Because that's not how it works. No. And he says, and I'm telling you, as your friend, do not go out there in front of the world and say that. Yeah. But Vladimir Putin did, and I remember sitting in the sidelines, in the wings, watching the American press corps try so hard not to laugh. I almost felt bad for Putin, but then I decided he didn't really deserve it.
Yeah, I didn't. By the way, we have some microphones up there, so a little bit later on you'll get to ask questions too. Okay. Just real quickly here, sometimes when I watch these press secretaries get up there at the podium, I get nervous.
You get nervous for them? Me too.
Yes, because I know maybe you have a secret in here and it just might blurt out.
You have to have a lock box in your head of top secret information.
You sound like Al Gore all of a sudden.
On purpose.
A lock box. Were you nervous?
No. I was over-prepared. Well, the first time I was mostly nervous because I didn't want to make a fool of myself, and I was replacing Tony Snow.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, very difficult.
Oh, God, one of our colleagues.
Yeah,
we miss him
one of our he was battling colon cancer, and I, because he had so many doctor's appointments and surgeries, that I ended up I actually got a lot of training with training wheels to become the White House press secretary because I filled in for him so much.
Yeah.
And he didn't have this thing that a lot of people in Washington have where you need to be around the boss all the time. He was quite happy to have me go and do the briefings of the president and travel with the president.
He was smooth.
He was smooth. I remember the first day that I had to brief on camera, something had happened in Iran, and I was waiting for a call from Condi Rice so that I could go out and do the briefing. And all of a sudden there's a knock on my door, and it's the young staffer who says, I have a special visitor for you to wish you good luck on your first briefing. I said, oh, okay. And in walks Bill Clinton.
Oh.
And he had just been having lunch with President Bush. And they used to have lunch a lot, and they never said, and we never told the press about it, but they became friends over the administration, the 2 terms. So he comes in, and Bill Clinton's a charmer, right? And he just wants to talk a lot. And all I kept thinking, I was like, very happy he came to see me, but all I could think was, I gotta get on the phone to Condi Rice, because I gotta walk down and brief the press, and I gotta be prepared. And so Mike McCurry, remember him, the press secretary for Bill Clinton, he and I are very good friends, and one time he gave me advice that when you're walking down the ramp from the press secretary office into the press briefing room, if you feel like you've got everything, turn around, because you're missing something. So I had this rule in my office that I should never be surprised by a question, ever. So I had great deputies.
You practice?
No. Well, a little bit.
I mean,
mostly in the briefing room, we would ask each other questions and imitate reporters and how they would ask them. Just to get in the mood, and then I would just use my most snarkiest answer in response just to get it out of my system so I wouldn't say it out loud.
Yeah.
And I would do things, a press secretary really has to be like a reporter. So I learned this trick from Marlon Fitzwater when I read his book called The Briefing. This is before I ever met him or before I was going to be a press secretary. But one of the things I would do as press secretary is you pick up on things. I had all the gossip, so the president liked me to be around. I just observe things and I know things. So let's say that I see something in the paper or I hear something from DOD, Department of Defense. And I think I might get asked that question. So what I would do is then I would tell Gordon, call the CIA and see if they ask them that question and see what they say. Don't tell them you saw the DOD points. Or call the State Department, call somebody else. And I would triangulate. I would get three sources because I never wanted to be at the podium and say something that had to be walked back. So I never felt like I was going to spill any beans about any sort of top secret information because, one, I'm under oath not to. And also, usually on the other end of that equation is an American life.
Yeah.
So, or an innocent life. So I didn't worry about that.
Did you
And
ever
I
go-
never burned a reporter.
No?
You know, if a reporter came to me and said, hey, I heard that there's a ship entering the Straits of Hormuz, I might say, if I knew that that was happening, I would say, oh, really? Yeah, I was like, if there's something to announce, I'll announce it, but I will come to you first, so that they could, so that that reporter could break the news. And that's why I think I had a pretty good relationship with them.
Did you ever have to lie?
No,
No,
and I wouldn't have.
you wouldn't have.
Absolutely.
How do you get
not.
around it when you know something?
There's like tools. So let's say that they know something is happening. I mean, sometimes I would use a tool like this with the reporters because I knew a lot of them. I would say, I understand why you're asking, and I can't answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
But if I were you, I'd be asking it too.
You know,
That's a little signal, right? That says, okay, like, I get it. I know you got the
That's
goods,
enough.
and I can't say it, so you can do. Or I might say somebody has information and it's wrong, but I can't tell them that it's wrong because that would be revealing classified information. So I might say, I wouldn't write that if I were you. And that was a warning to them that they're going to have that it was going to be wrong, that they had more work to do.
You know, she says in the book that anybody, I thought I had good stories. My gosh, I could listen to her for weeks. You say anybody could do this job, press secretary.
Sure.
Oh, come on.
You could do it. It would be
Dana.
hilarious.
Oh,
But you
my
could do it.
One day. Because I'd snap off on people.
Well, that's true. I mean, I do think that it's important for a press secretary to have a good demeanor. And one of the things I always thought was that I didn't think I was the press secretary for the Republican Party. I thought I was the press secretary for the United States of America, and I took that very seriously. I also turned down the heat in the briefing room. You know, Tony Snow's briefings were about 43 minutes long. He loved to argue and persuade, and I just wanted to get in and out. My briefings lasted an average of 21 minutes.
Wow.
But we had a great press office, and this is how I would always imagine it. If I was at the podium, and if I thought President Bush were watching the briefing, if I thought he wasn't going to be proud of something I was saying, then I didn't say it. Because when you're in the press secretary position, you have a lot of power, and you have all the information.
Yeah.
This is how I went into the room. I had all the facts, and I wanted all of them to know that I had all the facts. So that's why we could get it done real fast.
It's like a poker game.
They had business, and I had business.
How'd you get a black eye in Baghdad? Do you want to reveal that, though, because they haven't read the book?
Yeah, but when you open up the front page, I'll just tell you quickly, you can read the whole thing, but I start the story with the black eye of Baghdad. Do you remember when President Bush was at the press conference in Baghdad?
The guy threw the shoe.
And the terrorist disguised as a journalist is there. Well, I'm the only one who got hurt. Because thank goodness the president ducks twice. I mean, he's got excellent reflexes. And he's kind of bemused by the whole thing. But while it was happening, the Secret Service agent, and we showed this on Mike's program this morning, you can see the Secret Service agent lunging forward to get the president and searching the room. And I know what he's thinking in that moment, because I was thinking it too, which is, this is a distraction for a bomb. Because that's how they operate. And it occurred to me, I actually, in my mind, I remember thinking, here we go. Of course, it wasn't that, thankfully. But what happened when he lunged to get the president, the interpreter who was standing next to me was using a boom mic. And the steel arm of that swung around, and it caught me. I didn't see it coming. It hit me right there in the eye socket. And I'd never been hit before in my life, so it hurt beyond anything I'd ever known. But the president continues to do the press conference, and I'm crying. I'm with Ed Gillespie, the White House Communications Director. I'm crying, but I'm trying not to make any noise. And I just was convinced that we were going to be ushered out of the back. But the president was determined to do the press conference, which was the absolute right thing to do, to say to the world, oh no, this is how we do it in a democracy. We take questions from the media, no matter how ridiculous one of your brethren are. So anyway, we leave for Baghdad, we fly to Kabul, and I didn't know you're not supposed to lie on your side when you have a black eye, or when you've had some sort of face trauma. So I huddled on the floor of Air Force One because all the seats had been taken and they wanted to work in the conference room, and I just needed a few hours of sleep. And I wake up, and Mark Thiessen, the speechwriter, who's a big hockey fan, says, oh, did you sleep on your side? And I said, yeah, nobody, what are you talking about? And I didn't realize, so all the blood had pooled right here. And I finished the I finished the White House with a big black eye, which some people think is quite appropriate.
And then the president came over and hugged you, though.
Yeah, he did. He said, "Why?" I said, "I saw you crying, but I thought it was just because the guy threw a shoe at me." And I said, "Sir, you know I love you, but I grew up in Wyoming, and I'm a little tougher than that."
Do you mind telling the story about when Senator Warner saw you at
Oh, that's a great. I'm glad you asked that,
Yeah.
because
no
one's. No, I've done a lot of interviews, and no one has asked me
that
about
really
that.
touched me.
It's a great story. So, Senator Warner of Virginia, remember he was the one-time husband of Elizabeth Taylor?
Sure.
I always thought he was so majestic, right? He looked like a senator. He reminded me of the eagle in the Muppets.
The white hair.
Yeah. No, and he's just like, he was like of stature. And during a time when I end the book with a note of gratitude to all the people, and a lot of men, frankly, who gave me advice to help me achieve great career success. But this was a moment where Senator Warner has nothing to do with me necessarily. I mean, I knew him because of business, but I was just the acting press secretary. Didn't have the full job yet, but I got invited to this press dinner. Believe me, nobody gives themselves more awards than the press. Like, even more than Hollywood. It's unbelievable. So you could go to one of these once a week. So I got invited, and I'm sitting there, and all I could think of at the head table is, I have got so much work to do, and the work is piling up, and I can just imagine all of it, and I'm not even really there. And I hear my name announced as they announced the head table, and I sort of just went, thanks, and just want to get out of there. And I really didn't feel like I belonged there, because I'm just the acting press secretary, and they just had to fill a seat. So the dinner ends, and I see Senator Warner, Dana. I was like, "Oh, yes, sir, hi." And I thought maybe he'd have a message that he needed me to give to the president or something. And he said, do you mind if I just take a moment to give you a little piece of advice? I was like, "Sure." He said, "So I saw you up there, and when they announced you at the head table, and you just kind of gave them a half wave. Didn't even smile." He said, "And I got to tell you something. You're going to be at a lot more of these events. And you've earned your spot here, so when they announce your name, you stand up, you smile, and you wave at the crowd, and you let them have a moment to celebrate you, because that's why they're here." And I was like, wow, thanks. And I took that advice to heart, and it took me a while to be willing to do it, but then I realized what he meant, and I end the book that way to say, there's just been so many people that helped me along the way, and one of the reasons I called the book, and the good news is that not only he helped me, but people like my grandfather and my husband, who I met on an airplane, and President Bush, really all were the ones that said, "Let us give you a chance," and they celebrated my success.
I love that.
Yeah, he's
message.
great.
Because you
I
have
should send
earned
him
it.
a book.
You should send him a book.
Okay, I need to send Senator
Charge
Warner a
him.
book.
He's
What was I
rich.
thinking?
Um,
Is he rich?
I think he still has money.
Okay.
Yeah. Great hair and good money. Did you hear what she just said? Oh, by the way, how do you say the name of your book? Is it "And the Good News Is," or is it "And the Good News Is"?
Okay, you and Gutfeld have a lot more in common.
Oh no, did
than
he
you
ask
think.
you that too?
No, but what he said is, he said, so the way I would always end every meeting in the Oval Office, because typically when you go to see the president, my theory is you deliver bad news first and you follow it up with something positive, so that when you leave, people think that they want to see you again. And the good news is something I use a lot to try to help people find common ground. But what Gutfeld laughs about is that, and the good news is on the shelves now, right? So there's the double is, and it's bugging Gutfeld
so
like
great.
crazy.
Oh. So the good news is, you talk about all the advice that you've received over the years. Do you want to share any more of those? Or you have another nugget from somebody that, because I know that the president would say, when it would be taking a lot of heat, you've got to know when to pick your fights.
Well, we were under strict instruction from the president not to rise to the bait of any political shenanigans in the 2007-2008 election. And when Hillary Clinton and Obama are going at it in their primary, everybody was running against George W. Bush. And even McCain was running against George W. Bush. I mean, basically it was all the time. So I turned the other cheek a lot. And one time I remember asking him, "Sir, why do we always have to turn the other cheek?" And he said, "It's your burden to bear."
Yeah.
But he was right. And one day, I didn't take his advice. I popped back, and 30 minutes later, Hillary Clinton has an email fundraising thing out, based on my comments, and the president gives me a call. And I said, oh, shoot, I'm busted. Because when I could see the phone, I know when it comes up, I knew who it was. I'm like, yes. And he says, look, I know what you're trying to do for me, and I appreciate it, but I'm going to be fine. The best thing that we can do for John McCain is just keep our mouths shut and focus on our jobs. And then as we got later into the presidency and almost finishing, everybody wanted to know about his legacy. He said, look, last year I read 3 biographies of George Washington, and if the historians are still writing and analyzing the first president, then the 43rd doesn't have a lot to worry about because he'll never know. Mm-hmm. So he was right, and I did wrestle with it a lot professionally, that maybe we didn't do enough to fight back, but I actually think that handling it the way that we did was the way that he expected us to run operations, with honor and dignity and grace.
You use those 3 words a lot in that book.
Yep. And I really think that those 3 words, if you conduct yourself like that in your office and in your personal life, you actually get to that part of being joyously content. See how we wrap that?
It was really
right
nice.
Up?
A nice little package.
Just as Craig comes up.
So you almost voted for Bill Clinton, huh?
I almost voted for Bill Clinton, yes.
In '92.
Yeah, but I saved myself.
Okay. Isn't she great? The reason I agreed to do this, because they said this is the easiest interview on earth. You ask maybe 5 questions and she takes it.
Well, it's like the only time I get to talk. When I'm on the 5, you probably notice.
True.
My husband says, you talk the least but say the most.
That's exactly
He's
right.
nice.
And she really did meet her husband on an airplane, sitting right next to you.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2.
Michael, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Like to turn to questions from all of you.
And be sure to ask Mike something too.
No.
We have 2 microphones. If anybody would like to go to one of them, we'll be happy to entertain your questions.
Oh, she's leaving. Oh no, she's going to a microphone.
Dana, it's a pleasure to see you in person.
Thank you.
You are always especially composed. And I've wondered, is there anything in your life or in your childhood, or what really has helped you to maintain that composure? Because I remember you as a press secretary. I felt you were a standout among press secretaries because of that composure.
Thanks for that question. When I started to write the book, and I wanted to write the stories about President Bush and the advice piece, the editor said, you can't really show up at age 35 in the Oval Office in a memoir. People need to know, where did you come from? And my grandfather, I think that was my first example of somebody who showed that strength and gentleness go hand in hand. I also felt like it was just more effective to be composed and to be the kind of press secretary that the president would want me to be, and I wanted to be able to sleep at night. And also, we're just so blessed in America. I feel like there's no reason to fight all the time. The other thing I think my grandfather really taught me was so self-control and dealing with emotions, right, appropriately. And so when I do get mad, either in the press briefing room, like when I finally had enough with Helen Thomas when she suggested that our troops were purposely targeting innocent civilians. I just said, that will not stand in the briefing room. Or if I finally get mad about something on the 5, then people know that there's a reason to listen. I mean, if you are manufacturing outrage all the time, everyone will tune out. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for coming to speak tonight. I really appreciate it. It was fantastic listening to these stories. One thing that I would like to know about is, after 6 years in the White House, a number of the original staff has probably left at that point and moved on to other things. So when you came in after the 6-year itch in 2007, 2008, I'm sure it was a kind of unique group of people who were still in the White House by that point. What were the relationships that you were most proud of and that you developed the most amongst the White House staff in those last 2 years that you were there?
Oh, I love this question. Okay, so I was actually one of those people who was about to leave. And actually, I start chapter 3 with the story that the day I get the job as White House press secretary was the day I went in intending to resign. Because we had been told, like, if you don't think that you can make it to the end and finish strong, then you should maybe consider leaving now so that there's a fresh team all around. So my husband and I went on this trip, and we made all these plans that I was going to leave, and it was hard for me to think about leaving, but, oh, of course, I'm a planner. So I thought, okay, if I leave the White House, I'll be able to walk the dog 3 days a week. I'll make breakfast on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I had all these plans, and I go in to tell Ed Gillespie, and he says, hey, I need to see you too. Can I go first? And I said, okay, and I sat back, and he offers me this press secretary job. Mm. So I was one of those people that was about to leave, and I would say that actually Ed Gillespie, who is, he's accomplished so much. He was the RNC chairman. He worked at the White House, started 2 very successful businesses, written several books, wrote The Contract with America, and recently ran for Senate in Virginia. And I remember on election night, he was so close to winning, and no one believed he'd had a chance except for me. And Megyn Kelly and Brett Baer knew that, and they mentioned it that night on the coverage. They said, why did you think he could win? I said, because sometimes you believe in your friends. And Ed Gillespie is almost more like a brother to me, a brother I wanted, unlike Greg. So I would say that relationship, but also I'm so proud of my press office team. And one of the things I do in the book is I dedicate it to my Bush administration colleagues. And that meant a lot to them, because these stories about the president they worked for have never been told, and he gets such a bum rap in a lot of coverage that they finally could read these stories and have a New York Times bestseller that in some ways I'm still the voice of that administration, and I take that seriously and with joy, actually.
Have you heard from the president about the book?
Yes, I saw the president. I was there, I'm losing track of days. I went to Dallas, I think it was last week. We had a little private meeting. That was fun. Told me some political gossip. I'm not going to tell you, but it was good. I gave him a little gossip, which he loved. But really, he thanked me for writing the book. And then when he introduced me, he surprised the crowd. They didn't know he was going to come and introduce me. And I was really proud because he's a reader. And he said, it's a really good book.
And here he is now, ladies and gentlemen, the president. You got me instead of President Bush. Tell us about the last day of his inauguration of President Obama, 2009. And you have to spend the last moment together of his presidency.
I'm leaving Capitol Hill. I get on the subway because I don't have parking pass anymore. And everybody's going down to see President Obama, and it was freezing cold, but they were so joyous. And I just sat in the subway, like watching everybody, very happy for them. And I got off and I walked to the White House, and it was my last day. Said my thanks to them before the Marine opened the door. And I was in the Oval Office with him, and he said, he put his arm around me. He said, the day I came in here, I said, I want to be able to look myself in the eye and say that I maintained my integrity while I was here, and I can do that. And I said, you can. I tried so hard not to cry, and he said, and now I am going to go take a last walk around the South Lawn with his dog. And I said, when he left, I remember the photograph. It's a great photograph of him in this duster with his cowboy hat. And I said, there went a great president. 6 months later, the last photograph in the book that you're going to get, it's my favorite photograph. I didn't even know this photograph existed. I then see him one last time. And he's now at Andrews Air Force Base, and he's about to get on the plane to leave for Texas, that he calls the promised land, and Mrs. Bush calls the afterlife. And he sees me, and he calls me over, and he just kisses my forehead. And I end the book by saying that at that moment, I felt like everything was ending. But the good news was,
it's beginning.
Here we are.
Yeah, it's the sweetest picture too.
Young lady in the back, please.
Hi Dana, my name's Carissa. I'm a freshman over at Penn, and I'm a communications student.
Oh, you're the perfect little target market.
Looking to go into political communications. And one of the things that really struck me was that you're just the second female White House press secretary, even though you typically think of communications as such a female-dominated sector. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on that and what you think can be done to change that.
And the first Republican, Dee Myers was.
Yeah, Dee Myers was the first Republican.
Second female first.
Yeah, it was the second female. You know, I don't know. I've been asked questions of like, how hard was it to be a woman in the press office? I'm like, well, first of all, I didn't have time to think about it. And also, I was completely supported in the White House. And the president made sure everyone knew that her calls get returned first. And that happened. I never had a problem. I never had to go to somebody and say, could you get the State Department to call me back? I mean, it just never happened. And also, I was surrounded by people in senior staff like Candy Wolf ran legislative affairs. Fran Townsend was in charge of Homeland Security. Margaret Spellings was the Education Secretary. Margaret Peters at Transportation. Secretary Chow at Labor. Secretary Rice at State. I mean, I could go on, but I just was surrounded by strong women, but we didn't put a press release out about it. We just did it. And I think that that will change. I think that that presidents choose press secretaries based on the amount of trust that they have and the relationship that they have. And I think that there's any number of women in the Obama administration that could have been chosen, but I think the president chose the best person that he thought for the job, and that's really what we should want.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't Margaret said you need your big girl pants?
Yeah, one of my favorite pieces of advice was from Secretary Margaret Spellings. She called me my first day as press secretary, the official first day. She said, just to wish me well, and said, how's it going? And I said, well, I'm really nervous. And she said, well, put your big girl panties on and deal with it.
Get out there.
Yeah, like you don't have a choice.
Yes, thank you, Dana. And I'll say, Mike, thank you very much for this kind of conversation. And what I wanted to ask is, why is that this kind of conversation you have, the kind of more lighthearted instead of serious outrage you do on the 5? Why is it so hard for the parties now to come together? To this day, there are people that hate President Bush. I mean, you can't mention the name. There are people that hate President Obama. Just the name makes them crazy. And it hasn't always been like that.
No, and in fact, if, hopefully you'll love chapter 6. I call it Civility Lost and Found. I tell this great story about meeting President Obama at the Gridiron Dinner. I was a junior Birdman, 2005, and I had never been to this Gridiron Dinner. Again, what do you think it is? The press giving themselves awards.
Yeah.
So anyway, I get to the table. I'm at USA Today's table, and the seat across from me is empty. And who sits down but the junior senator from Illinois, Barack Obama. And he and I end up laughing our butts off for 4 hours. Had so much fun, and in the break, he takes me over to meet Michelle Obama. And I got home that night, and my husband said, how was your night? And I said, wow, I said, it was great. I got to meet Barack Obama. And I got to tell you, I think he could be president in like 20 years. And 3 years later, when McCain and Obama came to the White House to have the meeting about the bank bailout bill, which was the worst meeting in all of Washington, D.C. ever, I'm the last person to file into the cabinet room. And I stuck out my hand to introduce myself, and Obama says, oh, Dana Perino. And I thought, oh my gosh, he knows who I am. And he gives me this big hug, and I said, sir, you might not remember. And he puts me like that and says, not remember? That was my favorite night in all of Washington.
That's great.
And I sit down, and the deputy chief of staff says, what was that all about? And I said, I'll tell you later, but I just might vote for him too.
And then he appointed you to the broadcasting.
Yeah, he appointed me, and then actually at the George W. Bush portrait unveiling, we're going through the line. I told Carl we shouldn't go through the line, but we end up going through the line, and Bush sees me and wraps me in this hug, and he kisses my forehead again. This is the theme. Obviously, I'm little. And he says to Obama, this one. And Obama said, oh, I know. Everybody loves Dana, and I've got Jay Carney.
Well, we've just about run out of time, and I couldn't think of a better way to end than that.
Yeah.
Everybody
Sorry,
loves
Jay.
Dana.
Everybody loves Dana.
We do love you, Dana.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For those of you staying for dinner, we're just going to take a little break and reconvene in the fireplace room down the hall. And for the rest of you, have a great evening. Thank you.